throughout the summer in many of the lessons that we've had, messages that we've brought to you, that have been through Jesus' parables. Today we see another parable that he brought about and presented really to his disciples. It's one of the harder parables. It's a sensitive parable. It deals with a sensitive subject. That's forgiveness. It's a parable about how the kingdom of heaven regards forgiveness. It's an idea that Jesus is telling us that we need to take to heart. That forgiveness is required. It is a part of the kingdom. But again, we need to remember that forgiveness is a very sensitive subject. It deals with hurt, embarrassment, pain, and longings. It all started when Peter asked Jesus a question. Jesus had been talking about how we should deal with people when they've wronged us and trying to set things right. So Peter asked this question. He said, how many times should I forgive someone? That's a good question. I think we ask ourselves that question a lot, don't we? I mean, when is enough enough? When do we finally say, back off? And Peter puts it in a way of saying, how many times should I forgive my neighbor? Or any? What's interesting to me, and I love Peter, he's one of my favorite subjects in the Bible. Before Jesus can even come up with an answer, Peter volunteers an answer for him. He asks the question in earnest, but then all of a sudden he throws out the idea of 7. What about 7 times? 7 times sounds good. To Peter, that's pretty generous. To be quite honest, that's overly generous as far as Peter's concerned, especially when you consider the fact that in that day and time, the Jewish community had an idea that forgiveness should not be more than 3 times. If your neighbor offends you, forgive him. If he offends you twice, forgive him. If he offends you a 3rd time, you need to forgive him. If he offends you again, you're not required to forgive. It's almost mechanical. You're relieved of any responsibility or any need to forgive after that, as far as the Jewish community was concerned. That doesn't mean you had to live by that, but that was a good, fast rule. But Jesus turns to Peter, and he tells him something. He said, I tell you, not 7 times, Peter, but 77 times. Can you imagine how they must have felt, those disciples standing around? I mean, it sounded like what Peter said was pretty generous, and they probably kind of balked at that to some degree. But then Jesus comes along and says, no, not 7 times, Peter, but 77 times is the way this ought to work. You see, Jesus has posed a radical suggestion to these people. Oh, but then again, the kingdom of heaven is radical anyway, isn't it? So they shouldn't have been really too surprised. You see, he's not requiring an additional number of gracious acts on their part. He's not saying, no, let's stretch it out a little bit further, Peter. That's not what he's saying here. And he's certainly not suggesting a ledger for us to keep a list of the wrongdoings that are done to us. I don't think that's it at all. In fact, I believe what he's doing, he's suggesting that forgiveness is a deep reservoir of grace. And it should never run dry. That's pretty radical. Kind of makes us a little bit uneasy, doesn't it? And I can understand it because, again, forgiveness is a very, very sensitive subject. But then Jesus goes on with this parable then. He begins by telling them, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. Settling accounts. And I think that we can learn much from this king in this parable. He begins by saying that one servant owed him 10,000 talents to this king. 10,000 talents. That may not sound like a lot, but even in today's time, that's millions and millions of dollars. That's a lot of money. Here's the kicker. That servant can't pay it back. There's no way he can pay it back. He can't do that. It's an incredible amount of money. So therefore, the damage is done. There's no restitution in this whatsoever. You can't pay it back. The damage is done. So the king does the next best thing. He orders that this man, along with his family, be sold and all of his goods be sold and try to recoup some of his losses. Now, if you were living in that day and time, you probably would have said, well, that's fair. That's the way things work. And it wasn't unusual to buy and sell slaves in those days. And that's the way most people would have seen it. And obviously, this servant had done something wrong. Let's don't let him off the hook. Somehow or another, and it's not explained in the parable, but he squandered 10,000 talents. He's either stole it, or used it up without anybody's knowledge, or made some bad investments when he knew better to do so, and so now there's a problem. He's in trouble. He squandered that money. So the servant, I think, does the only thing he can do at that particular time. And Jesus tells us in the parable that he falls to his knees and he asks his king, are you ready for this? Be patient with me and I'll pay it back. He can't pay it back. That's not going to happen. That's too much money. The damage is done. And I think therein lies our problem sometimes with the idea of forgiveness. We start off by telling us, well, the damage is done. The hurt's out there. There's nothing I can do about that. And often we don't want to forgive. Even though we might know we should. Well, there's several reasons for that. I won't go into all of them by any means, but the two that come to mind to start with, we want to get back at somebody for some wrong that they've done to us. We call that revenge. We need to get back at it. That's what we tell ourselves. But then we also have a problem, and sometimes we think that the person who has hurt us ought to do something or say something to put things back in place. But they can't. They can't any more than this servant could. Which brings us to the first lesson, I think, that we have in this particular parable. The burden of forgiveness is on the forgiver, not on the one who committed the offense. Or they may ask for forgiveness, but the burden of forgiveness falls on the one who's been offended. It's on us when we are offended. And so, in this particular parable, this king does something totally unexpected. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. My goodness. 10,000 talents. Let him go. Can you imagine this servant's relief? Can you imagine how he must have felt? Incredible amount of money. All that debt forgiven. therein lies the next lesson that we can learn. You see, the main thing is that losing that kind of money in this particular case, or any kind of hurt sometimes, runs deep. And we are hurt when we're offended. But therein lies the lesson that forgiveness doesn't deny the hurt. Forgiveness doesn't mean denying that we've been faulted. It doesn't say we erase the hurt. The hurt is there. Just ask your adult dealing with the realization that they were abused by a parent when they were growing up. And they're struggling with the idea of trying to forgive that parent. It hurts. It hurts. Or think about the parent trying to put together their life after a spouse has cheated on them and left them to raise a family by themselves on one person's earnings. It hurts. It hurts a lot. And think about the young businessman who's coming to grips with the hard fact that a trusted business associate, a friend of his, has been stealing money from the company and has now brought it almost to the point of bankruptcy. Gosh, it hurts. Struggling with trying to forgive that. No. Understand this. Forgiveness doesn't mean denying our hurt. The hurt is there. But let me tell you what forgiveness does mean. Forgiveness means letting go of the one who hurt us. Let go of the one who hurt us. That's hard, isn't it? We don't want to forgive people like that sometimes. I don't. They've hurt us. They've abused us. They've wounded us. And in some cases, they've caused untold misery in our lives, things that we can't put back. Then again, forgiveness is a very, very sensitive subject to deal with. So many of us simply hold the hurt within us. There were two men who had been in a concentration camp during the war together. And they just happened to meet each other one time in a coffee shop by chance. And they sat down for a few minutes and talked with each other about how things had been going in their lives. And finally, one of them in the middle of the conversation turns to his friend and he says, "Have you forgiven our captors?" The man looked over at him with a very stern face and said, "Hell no! I'll never do that." And the man raised his eyebrows and said, then they still have you in prison, don't they? Forgiveness is a release. It releases us from the power of those who wronged us. We don't need to let them hold us. Though the damage is done and the hurt is there, we need to move on. In Charles Flood's book, maybe some of you have read it, it's called Lee, The Last Years. He tells a story about Robert E. Lee that goes to this lady's house in Kentucky after the war. She's bitter. She's extremely angry and she can't let go of her feelings. The war has pretty much destroyed everything that she had. She's very upset with the North. And she takes Lee out to an old tree, a grand old tree that used to sit in the front of their house there. A beautiful tree. People used to talk about it. And she bitterly starts to cry that the limbs and the trunk have been destroyed by the Union troops as they marched through her land there. They tore everything up. And she finally turns and looks at Lee for some sympathy. She wants him to join into it. She wants to hear some kind of condemning word from him to feed her anger. General Lee looks at the lady and he says, "My dear madam, let go. Him. You see, we can't live our lives the way God intended us to live. We can't do that unless we're willing to forgive those who have hurt us. It's hard to do that. But here's the reasons. To start with, it's better to forgive the injustices of the past than to allow them to remain in our hearts and control us. Because our anger and our need, we think, for revenge can control us. It's better to forgive than let the bitterness take root and poison the rest of our lives. I personally know several people that live that way. They're not happy, and they never will be, until they learn to let go. It's a radical parable, isn't it? It really is. But I think if we recap very quickly, we find that we learn some things from this king, some of the acts that takes place here. To start with, we know that the burden of forgiveness is on the forgiver, not on the one who committed the offense. I think the next thing we learn is that forgiveness doesn't mean denying our hurt. That we are hurt. But forgiveness does mean letting go of the one who hurt us, which in turn releases us from the power of those who have wronged us. And that leaves us with the last reason for forgiveness. We can't live our lives the way God intended us to live. Happy, free, in the light, if we hold on to the things that hurt us. But then again, forgiveness, oh, it's such a very, very sensitive subject. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Now you take it from